Well, our last video cut off just right towards the end, so let's make sure that we're all good on that. One of the things we were looking at is nutrients that are required for a pregnant mom with a developing baby. So we said that we need about, and I'll round these off a little bit for your test here. So the book says 267 to 433% more iron than we usually do. So that's interesting. So we're going to say roughly 400%. So 4 times the iron that you need on a regular basis. You need. Now, why is that? Is because your circulatory system is the same for the baby. The mom's circulatory system and the baby's circulatory system. What does iron do? Iron carries the hemoglobin, which carries the oxygen for the baby, and so the iron that's in there develops a healthy red blood cell. So a mom actually needs 4 times the amount of iron she gets on a regular basis, twice the amount of vitamin D, okay, twice the amount of folic acid, and then 68% more protein. Of course, that's not surprising because protein is developing new cells, so we have to have new protein. So 68 more percent protein. And then the last one that we have, you need 50% more calcium. Of course, that's not surprising either because we're producing new bones in the baby. So these are things. So we talked about it a little bit earlier, but it's kind of interesting in a third world country or a place where you can't get the proper nutrition, then that's a problem. So we have different things. We have developmental problems there. But for a healthy baby, that's why we have prenatal vitamins, and they're right along this. Now there's other things you need as well, but these are the main ones. Iron, about 400%, 4 times what you ordinarily need. Vitamin D, twice as much. Folic acid, twice as much. And protein, 68% as much. Now, once again, this psychology class is interested in life and growth span. So this one we're talking about pregnancy. We're looking at some different things. So let's talk about some of the development, okay, between the embryonic period and the fetal period. Now, we always say that a pregnancy is 9 months, but it's kind of interesting because so 9 times 4 would be 36, but a full-term pregnancy, and you'll hear different things on this. Your textbook says full-term pregnancy is 38 weeks. You will hear some people say it's 39, or some people say it's 40. At 38 weeks, the baby should be fully developed. But why do we give it that? Why do we give it that leeway? Why do we say 38 to 40 weeks is a full-time pregnancy? Because as the baby develops, it's not going to be like, okay, week 1, here's where it grew, week 2, week 3. So you have that variety of growth, and in terms of nutrients and different things. So the baby may be 2 weeks ahead or 2 weeks behind. So that's why we say 38 to 40 weeks is a full-term pregnancy. So let's talk about what's happening. Okay, week 1 of we talked about this just briefly, especially in earlier psychology conversations that we've had. The egg and the sperm meet forms a zygote. Then we have what's called a blastocyst, which is just a bunch of cells. So the egg and the sperm meet. We have the zygote. It doesn't have organs. It doesn't have specialized tissue. And then we have the blastocyst, which is just all these fast-growing cells. Well, that's just within 2 weeks. Okay, that's just within 2 weeks. In 3 weeks, it's really interesting because in 3 weeks, the central nervous system begins to develop. Okay, the spinal cord begins to develop. The heart begins to develop. And that's in week 3. In week 4, the heart is beginning to almost be developed in terms of totally being there as an organ. And we get the eyes. We get the eyes finish developing. In week 5, we get the arms and the legs in week 4 and 5. You get your ears in week 6, and you begin to develop teeth. Now, teeth go all the way through now, all the way to the end, all right? And then in week 7, it's kind of interesting. In week 7, we develop our palate. Okay, now why is that such a big deal? Of course, the palate's the top of our mouth. We get the cecum that develops in between our nose. So now we're beginning to separate our respiratory system and our digestive system. So that's week 6 and week 7 and week 8. So and then the external genitals begin to develop in weeks 8 and 9. So it's kind of interesting. So you wouldn't even know if you had a sonogram. You wouldn't even know the sex of your baby until week 10, because the external genitals don't even begin to start developing till weeks 8 and 9. Somebody told me the other day, they said they had the wife was pregnant and they were going in for an ultrasound, and they said, well, you won't even know the sex of your baby until 10 or 11 weeks. And do what? Is it working?
20 weeks.
Oh, no. Okay, so sorry about that. I was just checking to make sure my film was working there. Okay, all right. So you don't even know the sex of your child, because in weeks 8 and 9, that's when the external genitals even begin to develop. So I was talking about this guy that went in at a certain point in his pregnancy, had an ultrasound, and said, shouldn't we be able to know that a lot earlier? And he's like, because all the equipment's really good, shouldn't we know that earlier? And so the bottom line is, you wouldn't know that even until the external genitals form. So then we have something interesting, okay? We have something interesting. In week 9, the brain begins to develop a little bit. But by week 16, okay, the brain is developed to where it begins to function. Okay, wow, so that's kind of interesting. So let's talk about that. What happens when the brain functions? So then we get stimuli back and forth. So in week 16, and the brain begins to start function in weeks 20 through 36, the brain continually stores information and begins to do more and more. But that's when we get the baby's movement, because then the baby gets stimuli and then the baby moves and kicks. So the brain has to detect the stimuli to cause the muscles to be able to move. So about week 16, the baby might start kicking. Okay, it's kind of interesting. And then in weeks 20 to 36, the brain gets fully developed and it begins to store information. So that's really interesting. And then by week 38, the baby is fully developed. The baby stays in the womb more than 38 weeks. It just continues to grow. The hair growth is actually one of the last things to develop. So sometimes we have a lot of hair growth. Sometimes we don't have much at all. A lot of that is genetic, and a lot of that is time of gestation period. Okay, so regardless, let me go over the key things that you need to know here. All right, and once again, this class is involved with life and growth span. So why is it so important that we cover this in this tape? It's important that we understand at what point these things develop, so that we can watch these and make sure we have good development. In week 3, we have the central nervous system begins to form, the heart begins to form. In week 4 and 5, we get the eyes and we get the limbs, the arms and the legs. Week 6, we get the ears, and then the teeth begin to develop. And in week 7, we get the palate. And then in weeks 8 and 9, we get the external genitals begin to develop. And the brain starts in week 9. And from week 16 to week 36, the brain really develops into a thinking, processing brain. So I'm going to tell you about the things that affect the nervous system. Extremely critical, okay? Extremely critical when you have a pregnant mom. Now, the interesting thing is, we're going to talk about these later, and all of these also affect the central nervous system even when you're older, okay? So I'm just going to list them. We're not even going to go through all the effects, but remember, these are critical. These are critical for the embryo and the fetal development of the child, in that these are things that cause the brain and cause the circulatory system and cause the central nervous system to not be able to react properly. And so these are damaging things to the baby. It's kind of ironic that they're also could be damaging later in life. So caffeine, okay, and coffee, tea, or Coke, the baby we can filter through a small amount of caffeine, but not a lot. Alcohol is definitely a problem. A baby that has too much alcohol in its bloodstream develops a fetal alcohol syndrome, and that's really which stops brain development. It's really a rough situation. Nicotine, cigarette smoking, of course, cocaine is really bad, and heroin, and just all kinds of illegal substances. We won't even go through and read them all. Here's one that they mention. It says marijuana is really, it says an increasing number of studies are finding that marijuana has really negative effects on the brain and the circulatory system, not just as an infant, but not just as a fetal, an embryo and a fetus, but also as an adult. So, it's kind of interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later. A lot of new research. It's kind of like years ago, smoking, really, when I was a kid, smoking was bad, but people didn't associate it with so many things that it was bad about. It's like now if you choose to smoke, you're like, oh, I really know what I'm agreeing to put my body at risk at. Well, now they're beginning to find out a lot of those things with marijuana as well. So basically what we've got there, we just talked about some of the things that we need to be really careful. Some of the substances that really affect the central nervous system. We talked about the development of the embryo and the fetus in this tape, and we wrapped that up. We also talked about the vitamins and the iron and stuff that the mom needs. So we're going to wrap up this unit. We've got a couple more units, and now we're going to walk you through. We just did birth. We've talked about community. We've talked about a lot of important things. So now we're going to walk you through a few more life and growth span in the next two units. So till then, see you then.